got with us an illustrious panel of presenters who are going to share with you their perspectives on what's needed to end homelessness in Victoria. And I'll introduce each of them in turn, and after introducing them, ask them to make some brief remarks. And then after they've all been introduced and made some remarks, you, the audience, will have a chance to ask them your questions. So do put your questions into the Q&A, and we will do our best to get through them all and ask them. So I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker, Professor Kath Hulse, who's one of our nation's most well-respected academics in the field of housing affordability. Kath is a professor of housing studies at Swinburne University, and her research has over a long period of time provided significant evidence of the difficulties faced by people on very low incomes in the housing market. And Kath's going to focus on the shortfall of affordable and available housing in Victoria. Thanks so much for being with us this morning, Kath, and over to you.
Thank you. I just remembered to unmute myself. I too respectfully acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional owners of the land in which I'm sitting at the moment, and which my university, Swinburne, which has campuses in Melbourne's east and outer east. And I pay my respect to their elders, past, present and emerging. Thanks, Jenny. Thank you for inviting me to such an important event, and congratulations to you and all the people who have produced such a well thought through and detailed plan for the state election. And yes, it's very important to promote this in whatever ways, different ways that we each have. Pardon me. I've been asked to talk about the shortfall of affordable and available housing in Victoria, and just by way of introductory remarks, we often look at waiting lists, and waiting lists are very important. And we know that the waiting list for social housing in Victoria is about 64,000, of which about 9,000 are people who want to move within the system. We also know that opportunities to get into that system have been declining for quite a long time, and last year about just less than 4,000 people got into that system. And in view of what the waiting list is and the number of people who can get in, and the number of people who use homelessness services who need long-term housing, which is just shy of 40,000, clearly there's a problem, it's not working. By way of introduction, I just want to talk a little bit about shortages. So a waiting list is a measure of shortages, but it's also a bit self-limiting in the sense that people may not apply because they haven't got a hope. And so other work is needed to look at the full extent of shortages. And lots of people have done that with lots of different methodologies. They've looked backwards, they've projected forwards, they've looked at snapshots at a point of time. I'm thinking of organisations like Anglicare who look at what's available now, and other people have done that too. So some of our work that we've done has looked over the longer term, and this is where the idea of affordable and available comes in. That was in the topic that I was given. And what that does is to look more broadly, particularly at the private rental sector, which is a source of and a major contributor to homelessness, to the extent that it doesn't work for low-income people. And we've been tracking that since 1996, looking at changes, and within that there are cycles. But what the work has done is to show really long-term and structural changes in the private rental market. And what I mean by that, the most important thing is the reduction in the sort of stock that's affordable to low-income people. And that's been an issue in the metropolitan area for a long time, and increasingly is an issue in regional areas as well. And what we've seen in COVID is a increase in demand in the regional areas and a mental crisis in a lot of places. So what is the shortage of affordable housing? So we look at it in a couple of ways, and I can expand on this if people ask me. But we just match up incomes with the stock that's available. But the difficult thing about housing, homelessness and housing, is it's all interconnected within the housing system. And if you have, it means that the sort of stock that's available, limited stock that's available to low-income people might be occupied by those on middle and higher incomes. And we know that over the last 15 years, there's been an increase in renters who are on middle and higher incomes. Some of those are there because they want to buy. They don't want to spend a lot of money on rent because they want to save for a deposit. So you get a real crunch point. And this is the availability issue, is the stock that in theory is affordable to people isn't actually available. And I can talk some more about that. So looking at our work and others, it would appear that the shortage of affordable housing for low-income people in Victoria is in the order of 100,000. So I think that to talk about the sort of numbers that are in this plan and to be precise about that is really good. I think it's part of a problem that is much broader. So it's very important to argue for more social housing, and basically it's a no-brainer when you look at some of the research. It's also important to look at some of the mechanisms for helping those in the private sector, because even under the most optimistic scenarios, about 2/3 of low-income households in the future are likely to be renting privately. So if you're thinking about preventing homelessness, this is an area where attention is needed. So I think, Jenny, I'll stop there.
Thanks, Kath. There's quite a few questions I'd love to ask you, but we've got plenty of time for discussion, and I think our wonderful audience will no doubt come back to you about some of those things that you flagged that you could talk a little bit more about. So the second person on our panel is Amanda Bingham, who's been a member of CHP's PES, Peer Education and Support Program, and she was recently central to our public-facing work on the need for a housing guarantee for victim survivors of family violence. And Amanda's going to tell you a little bit about her own experience of homelessness and what having a home has meant for her family. So thank you, Amanda, for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you, Jenny. And yeah, it's lovely to be here, and it's really good to hear the feedback and the research that's gone into this is incredible. So yeah, I'll just really briefly explain my situation. So I was homeless twice, unfortunately, but I'll just talk more about the recent time that I was homeless and pregnant. And I had, I fortunately had, well, it was a bit of a silver lining, but previous to that, being homeless, I kind of, when I was pregnant and homeless, I knew what to do and where to go. So I basically just did that. But it still meant that I spent a lot of time, living in either a hotel or I spent some time with the convents in Fitzroy, or staying in a women's refuge, or going back to staying in a hotel for one night, then going back to the access point through launch housing to get accommodation either for that night or for the extra week, or to be on the wait list for something else. So it was never a concrete plan of what I was going to be, where I was going to be living, until I lived with the nuns at the convent in Fitzroy, which I was there for 3 weeks while I waited for a spot at Launch Housing St Kilda. And I went there when I think I was about 6 months pregnant, and then I stayed there until my baby, a week before my baby was born. But they didn't tell me where I would be moving to. So I knew that I wouldn't be here. They said, yeah, we can't have the baby here. You're not allowed to have the baby here, so just wait. And I found out a week before. So I had lots of complications in my pregnancy. I think at the time I was quite grateful, and I think as a coping mechanism, I kind of looked at it as like, well, it's a surprise, you know, I don't know what's going to be happening, but that was the way I kind of looked at it, that it's, you know, exciting, I'm having a baby, but I don't know where I'll be living, so it's a bit of a surprise. But anyway, we got there, and I had my baby a week later, and it all worked out, and it was really, really nice. So, but that's not to say that the comforts of having a home are just not there, because it's not stability, and it takes a very long time to regain that comfort. And I think from being homeless before I was pregnant, so within a space of 3 years, I spent probably 6 months of that in an actual home, which was not even my home. So that doesn't, you don't really get over that quickly. And I think the only way that I will settle is to have my own house. So, but that idea is now, from someone that is really wanting that as a dream and to happen, I'm now shifting my mindset to that's probably never going to happen, and I'll probably have to rent forever. So that stability of the security of having a home of my own is likely never going to happen for me, and that's horrible. Yeah, I'll leave it there. Thanks, Jenny.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. And we'll come back to you, I think, for tap into a little bit more of your expertise about what our system improvement should look like in the future. But what you're describing there is, I think what Kath's saying is the future confronting 2/3 of our population, which is something that the land of the Great Australian Dream hasn't really come to grips with that change over time. But thank you so much, Amanda. Now, our next speaker is Bronwyn Pike, AM. She will be well known to many of you here today. She is the CEO of Uniting Victoria Tasmania, which is a major provider of homelessness services, as well as a wide range of other human services. Bronwyn is a former State Minister of many things in Victoria, including our former Housing Minister. And today, Bronwyn's going to focus on the importance of both preventing and stopping the reoccurrence of homelessness. Bronwyn, thanks so much for joining us today, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Jenny. And I join you also from Wurundjeri land and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. And it is a great pleasure to be able to support, Jenny, the work of the Council for Homeless Persons as you've prepared this election platform, and really also to note that the issue of access to affordable housing and more importantly, the focus on the number of our fellow citizens who are homeless is one that we have to continue to be vigilant about. It's easy to sort of have a flurry of activity and interest, and then people move on to the next thing. And so the persistence of the council and its work, and as Kath has said, the comprehensiveness of the paper and the key recommendations are incredibly important. I actually want to pick up on, I guess, a broader societal frame for some of these issues. And as you've said, Jenny, prevention is always better than the cure. And really, prevention goes to issues of, sorry, my lights have gone off here, everyone. There we go. The issue of prevention really goes to the broader issue of poverty and economic justice within our society, as well as the more specific focus around supply and how we increase supply, and particularly, as Kath has said, supply for people on lower incomes. But I don't know if any of you saw in The Age today, The Age is doing a lot of work on trying to tap into public sentiment prior to the state election, and it is also focusing on where the public would like to see the federal government move in policy terms around trying to bring the national budget deficit down. And the question was, do people think that we should pay higher taxes, or should we cut expenditure? And the absolute overwhelming answer that the Australian public gave was that we should cut expenditure. And I think that sends shivers down the spine of people who work in the health and human services sector, and certainly people who are concerned about issues of poverty, underlying poverty, and homelessness. So why is it that people are saying yes, cut services? And I do think it goes to this question of confidence in government and government's capacity to actually spend public resources wisely, and therefore I think people are saying, you know, I'm not sure I really trust government to do that, and that's something that I think we have to play a part in. We have to help to rebuild public confidence in public initiatives to address deep and profound problems within our society. The second thing I just wanted to highlight was the Four Corners program on homelessness a couple of weeks ago. And if you didn't see it, I do commend it to you, because I think what it really did is tap in, Amanda, to the deeply personal stories and personal experience of homelessness, and the huge degree of difficulty that so many people from groups in our society who we don't quite expect to be in this circumstance are facing, finding stable and affordable housing. So this is also a hearts and minds issue that I think we have to face, and we have to think about how we talk to our fellow citizens about the reality of homelessness, for not just your sort of stereotypical person who's lying on the street, who of course whose value to us as society is no different than the value of anyone else, but also people who we least expect to find themselves in these circumstances. Those very real and personal stories and experiences of people are continuing to grow. And I think the answers come in a national consensus, Jenny, that, as you said at the end of your comment, that, you know, we're the land of, you know, great opportunity, we're the lucky country, we're the country of a fair go. And we need to build that, I think, national consensus, and let's do it here in Victoria, that it isn't a fair go, that many of our fellow citizens, and not the ones that we, you know, would, as I said, see as your sort of usual suspect on the homelessness list, are in insecure, unaffordable, unstable, and short-term accommodation if they're lucky, and many of whom find themselves on the streets. So we do have a lot of data we do have a lot of information. I've got buckets of it here in front of me, and I can talk to you about all of the services that we're engaged in, but many of your organisations are doing the same work. So I guess I want my contribution, and I guess you'd expect a politician, a former politician, who's had to move beyond just thinking about data, but how do we win hearts and minds? And I think that's the bigger challenge for us all. How do we really build that view, that worldview? Because I think when people watch the Four Corners program, so many people I've spoken to have watched it said, I just never believed. I mean, here are hard-working people who, just because of a range of unfortunate circumstances, have found themselves homeless. That could be me. That could be a member of my family. That could be someone I know down the street. And when we are able to get that sense as a community that, we don't think that's acceptable, and we don't want that as part of our Victoria and our Australian future, then I think we'll also be able to make some progress in this space. Thanks, Jenny.
Thanks, Bronwyn, and thanks so much for sharing your expertise and experience and your wisdom. And that is, I think, a very good question. How do we win the hearts and minds? And I agree with you that that was the way the Four Corners program went about it. And our first question in the chat, which we won't go to just yet, perhaps is asking that question in a different way. So I might come back to you and Kath with that one. I'm now delighted to introduce to you Vicky Sutton, who's the CEO of Melbourne City Mission, key provider of homelessness services to young people across the state, as well as a range of other services. Vicky herself is a strong advocate for the needs of young people, and including, that we need improved responses for young people without homes, and we need to do more in relation to tailored social housing for young people. So Vicky's going to focus on ending youth homelessness with youth-focused housing and youth-specific supports. So over to you, Vicky. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Jenny. Well, I'd like to start by just also acknowledging the traditional owners. I'm here on Wurundjeri country as I tune in today from my home in Richmond. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders working in Melbourne City Mission, as well as across all of our services. I do want to thank Amanda for sharing her insights. It's nothing like hearing about the terrible stories that people go through as they're experiencing homelessness to, reinforce that we all have to do better. So I do want to chat to you about youth homelessness. Melbourne City Mission is Victoria's largest youth homelessness provider. We run the only youth-focused access point, which is in the heart of the CBD front yard and is a statewide service. We run multiple youth refuges, foyer programs, early intervention programs, family reconciliation programs tailored for young people, young parenting programs, etc. And we triage throughout the system. So when young people's experience is not resolved, we often see them back at front yard, and that gives us some really deep insights into how flawed our system is for young people. So I want to thank CHP in particular for their election platform and for including this really substantial section on youth homelessness. I'm really thrilled to see that we're really honing in now on what is the issue for young people who, as Jenny said, make up such a significant portion of all people coming to homelessness services for support. So I want to tell you a little bit about what we see through our experience triaging through the whole youth homelessness service system, not just our own services. 13,000 young people every year come to homelessness services without their parents needing assistance. That's about 1 in 6, or around 15% seeking help. It's a big proportion, as Jenny said. 2/3 of them are returning to front yard more than once. Some are returning up to 10 times. Many are trapped in our system. And Amanda spoke really compellingly about that. Why? Well, it's a few reasons, but at its heart, it's got to be housing. There's a gap of around 7,000 medium to long-term houses to meet the needs of young people. And what that means is that half of all the young people that come seeking a long-term home are not getting it. That's half. Why? Well, look, the private rental market is totally inaccessible to young people due to their lower income levels and their lack of rental history and their perceived riskiness as tenants. But, you know, one of the major issues that we're really honing in on now is the fact that our social housing system is not supporting young people at all. There are some reasons for that. Their income levels are lower than the average adult needing social housing support. And that means that most social housing providers, if not all, would say that it is unviable to house a young person, that their income will not cover their tenancy maintenance costs. And the tragedy of that is that of the 5.3 billion that is being allocated right now to our social housing service system to build 12,000 new social houses, none of them will go to young people. So we really need a specific requirement for social housing providers to invest in youth dedicated stock. And we haven't got that. And that means that young people are really missing from a vital part of the service system that's set up to address housing for people experiencing homelessness. Because they're merged in with adults, young people are invisible and these needs haven't been met. And, you know, when we think about early intervention, there's no better early intervention that when a young person presents to you addressing their homelessness issue immediately and setting them on a path to independence is going to avoid them, you know, becoming entrenched in the system and moving into the adult homelessness service system. So investing in young people overall is part of early intervention. So we are seeking some critical changes and commitments this election cycle, and CHP have reflected, have that in their platform as well, which we're so thrilled about. Firstly, we want a youth housing and homelessness strategy. Without this strategy, you can't see how the different parts of the system are not connecting up to serve young people. And the issue around the housing that I've just talked about is invisible without kind of looking specifically at the housing that's being allocated to young people. We want to see an investment in social housing stock for young people, and we join the CHP in calling for 5,000 new homes for young people over the next 4 years. We know that young people come at a particular stage in their lives when they still need to complete their education, gain employment, generally need to deal with trauma as a result of what's led them into the homelessness service system, and often just build some basic skills like, you know, being a good neighbour, budgeting, cooking for oneself, managing, you know, just their life. So support packages going with that housing are really important as well. And that kind of lends itself to that housing first approach. So, you know, when we sit back and think, I've got young people, I've got a 20-year-old, I've got a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old. And the young people that we see in our service, you know, they're not there through any fault of their own. They're mostly fleeing family violence. They're independent enough now to flee. They're coming to homelessness services as a last resort. And they're getting a really poor response. As a community, we need to do more to look after our young. Where they don't have the family or the support structures in place to do that. And we need to focus on a strategy and investing in the housing to actually achieve that. So they've got a chance, like all of us and like my children, to lead the life they envisage for themselves. Thanks, Jenny.
Thanks, Vicky. I think I've unmuted myself. You'll hear me?
You have.
Okay, good. The machine was speaking to me, which is always a bit confusing. But look, thank you very much for you know, those thoughts just coming more generally, but also from the perspective of one of our very big youth homelessness providers. and who's also been doing some great work in the background about what future models should be looking like. So now's the time when we can throw open to our audience, and we've got plenty of time for that. So I'm hoping that we can have a bit of a conversation. And we do have one question in the Q&A. So can everybody see the Q&A down the bottom of your Zoom page? And there's plenty of room for you to get your questions in, or we'll just have a bit of a conversation amongst the panel in any case. But there is one question in there, which I'm not sure that I fully understand, but I'll ask it, and I wonder whether Kath, perhaps, and perhaps even Bronwyn might have a view about it. So it's from Wade Roberts, and Wade says, I see that much of the work that needs to be done runs counter to foundational policy ideologies. Is there any work being done to reframe the threat or infliction of homelessness as categorically untenable? And I think what Wade's saying is, we're all assuming homelessness is an ongoing part of our world, and that we should be really flipping it around and asking the question about, well, it's just unacceptable to have homelessness. And I know there's legislation in the UK that puts responsibility on governments to make sure people are not. But I wonder if you've got any thoughts about that, Kath.
Yeah, insofar as I understand the question, there's a couple of parts to it, really. The first is about ideology. And I think that it's really clear that an ideology about the desirability of owning your own home drives a lot of the housing system and a lot of decisions in that system. And I noticed I don't know whether anybody's read the Productivity Commission review of the National Housing and Homelessness Agreement, which they find to be rather ineffective, which is interesting in terms of targeting of money and the money that goes into assisting people into home ownership, which largely has the effect of raising prices for those very people who are trying to get in, has not been a good use of government funds. And that, I think, goes to Bronwyn's broader point about, how effectively does government spend taxpayers' money, and to what extent does that affect support for governments in the sort of programs that they carry out. And I agree with Bob, and I think there's been quite an erosion of trust over the years, and it's very important in an area such as this that we work to, build public trust in the fact that something can be done. This is not a problem. It's a complex, difficult, interconnected problem, but it doesn't mean that you can't do anything that's effective, and you need to have a really close look at that. But ideology sometimes blinds us to it. And if you have the government's Productivity Commission saying that, it's pretty clear that there's an issue with that. And the second bit of that, I've now forgotten. Hang on.
Is there any work being done to reframe the threat or infliction of homelessness as categorically untenable?
I think that there has been some work, but as yet not really successful. And people have looked at jurisdictions such as Scotland, it springs to mind as a place which has done a lot of work in this area where homelessness is not tenable. But so far, governments in Australia have resisted this. I think largely the sort of unknown cost implications of doing it. And even though we have some sort of, if you like, a natural experiment with the COVID era and ending street homelessness in Victoria, we now have some real information about what that would mean, which I think is really, really useful. And it wasn't the billions of dollars that went into what they call JobKeeper and all of those things. It really was quite modest amount of money to have a very big effect on people because everybody was scared in a public health emergency.
Thanks, Kath. Any of our other panelists?
I just might make a comment there, Jenny, and say that there are opportunities, I think, to sometimes shift conversations about these big and complex problems. And at the Job Summit, recently, I think people did begin to focus on how you drive productivity and economic growth nationally, and what are the barriers to that. And so that's about shifting the paradigm away from a welfare paradigm to a what are the things that are going to contribute to people being able to engage in the economy, to get work and, obviously fulfill their own personal aspirations, but also build our nation. And when you see those shifts happen, it's a good thing. It's happened in health. Where people say, let's have a healthy community, let's not have a sick community, because if people are sick, they can't work, and if they can't work, we're in trouble. And if people are homeless, there are lots of ways they can't participate in the community. So we've seen that debate shift in childcare, and I think we need to see it shift, and we can see it shift in the whole conversation about the provision of long-term secure housing. And the way we have a window of opportunity with low unemployment levels and national skill shortages, and people are looking closely at what are the drivers of that and what are some of the solutions. And housing is in the mix. And so that means sometimes we can get other partners. So it's not just the welfare sector, the traditional people saying this is not fair, which it isn't. This is not just, which it isn't. But also this is not smart to allow this to happen in our country. And that's where we need to get to as well.
Thanks, Bronwyn. And I think that's certainly what the Everybody's Home campaign tried to do during that job summit. And we'll have to persist, as you have said, in trying to drive those conversations. Now, I must say our audience is being a little uncompliant in terms of asking questions. So, Amanda, I might go to you if you don't mind. And can you tell us a little bit more? You're a victim of family violence. You found yourself homeless. What should the service system look like that actually would have helped you more effectively and more quickly?
Oh boy, I think I can answer. I think I can, discuss a number of things that would have made it easier.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I think the main thing is there's repeating your story. There's going to services over and over again to get the same thing. Seeing someone that's having a bad day and them taking it out on you. But I think the main thing is just being placed into a home quickly, especially when you're pregnant. It's the answer is just to have more housing stock available. And the fact that, I feel like the fact that we have to sit here and talk about being pregnant and homeless, and, I think that the government needs to do so much better. And, there are programs like Cornelia, which, is also governed by the funding that the government gets, which hopefully it still will be funded for the next umpteen years. But I don't think there should be a stoppage on this type of program, no matter what it is, whether it's youth and homelessness, pregnancy and homelessness, drug and alcohol and homelessness, whatever it is, it should just, be there for the person that needs it and the supports that go around with it. So housing and supports.
Okay. Well, we're on the right track, but we should be able to achieve those things, shouldn't we, Amanda?
Yeah, we should.
It should be doable.
Yeah.
And we should never be having a bad day when we're working with clients, but having more stock would certainly reduce those bad days as well.
Jenny, I might just build on, what Amanda said, and Bronwyn, made this sort of observation. But, I think what we saw in COVID, particularly with the emergence to the Homelessness to Homes program, is, that an investment can change things and can demonstrate what we can do in our service system. I think Kath was the one that pointed this out. And, I look at that as a real silver lining from COVID in demonstrating, most of the principles of housing first. And of course it was accelerated, and the Age has done some great pieces, on it over the last couple of days. So there's bumps in the road, but
warts and all,
but at its heart, the provision of housing and, the extensive supports based on what the individual needs has really, COVID, gave us the opportunity to trial that in a very big way. It was a sort of 1,200, 1,300 packages. And I think, what experiences we can leverage from that and extend those kinds of programs into the youth space, into all the other spaces, to Amanda's point. And our current system is very much broken into a homelessness response, refuge, homelessness support, and a housing, response. And H2H beautifully demonstrated the layering that has to take place there and at its heart, the provision of a home. But I'm, optimistic that we've had a decent crack at this in Victoria and have got some great things to leverage on as a result of COVID.
So Vicky, just while you've got the floor, can you say a little bit more about what you think the absolute key ingredients of a youth homelessness strategy need to be?
Yeah, well, it's not rocket science. I mean, we have to start with stock. And, I've become more and more horrified. In my 6.5 years working, with Melbourne City Mission, I've certainly seen it was a problem when I started, but it's now almost, impossible. And we've seen that in the whole community, that housing's become such a, major issue, access to affordable housing, and it's just so compounded for youth. So we've got to start with resolving the stock, and we've got to start with why our social housing system is not making any of that stock available to young people. But then it's, and I think as part of that, there's some additional subsidies that will be required to make it financially attractive, but there's also going to be a requirement that we get the actual capital allocated to youth stock, because there are other reasons that young people are perhaps seen as not ideal tenants. They're, they're seen as property, property damaging, high potential property damage, and they move a lot, and that's very natural for a young person, but it doesn't suit a social housing, model. So we have to address some of that, and I think we can address that through subsidies and the requirement to allocate a specified amount of stock. But then beyond that, it's really housing for first wraparound support attached to that, so that as young people are housed, they're getting the necessary support to make that successful transition. And that includes components of addressing the past trauma, working to connect into education, working to connect into employment opportunities, being part of your community, building great relationships, the whole range of things that, for the kids that I've got living in my home, they're with us and they're able to spend that time developing those skills while they're supported by, their family and friendship relationships. And young people in our service system don't have those supports. So it's not rocket science. It is a sort of a housing first for youth model, and taking the best of those models that we're seeing overseas and the piloting of what we're seeing through H2H here in Victoria, and applying that to youth. You're on mute, Jenny. Had to happen once.
I was going so well. But thanks, Vicky. And that is encouraging that we're banging on the right pots and pans there, and we will keep doing it. Kath, so many conversations go to what I call a magic pudding approach to providing social housing, where some miraculous combination of private and institutional investment will do the job. And I've seen many a conversation derailed, never to return, with the excitement associated with that idea. Can you tell us a bit more why it does have to be government?
I think the federal government announced the other day that it was having a working group with people from financial institution and pension funds to look at investing in affordable housing. And I just laughed when I read it. There have been so many forums like this, some of which I've sat through. And at the end of the day, the pension funds will say, yes, but we have to invest the pension funds for the benefit of members. And, that doesn't necessarily, it's not a good fit with investing in social housing. So we do tend to have these rather circular conversations. And at the end of the day, for where incomes are very low and where what people can afford at the moment is very modest, there is no answer other than some sort of social housing. And I think that's reflected in the plan that CHP's put forward. For others whose circumstances may change, and as Bronwyn says, there are other sorts of strategies around employment and all sorts of other things, that this may be a temporary phase and their incomes may go up in the future, they may be better situated. And I think that we're looking at different sorts of things for that group. And it may well be that for those people, you can get in other types of financing. And we see that already in Victoria. But look, it's a hard slog for people to get in private finance and to make that work for a low income group. And it doesn't work for a really, really low income group. So I think, the social housing is a very big part. There is no other alternative. The thing about social housing is not just that it's there, but it's a means of keeping that housing affordable in the longer term. And other schemes have not really been able to do that to the same extent. So you want to be able to keep it affordable so that it doesn't float onto the market. And this is the thing with the inclusionary zoning as well. You get affordable housing as part of that, but for how long is it affordable? And that depends on how it's managed, who owns it, how it's managed, who it's allocated to, and all the rest of it. So, at the bottom end, there is no doubt that that is what you need, and you need a lot of it. And as someone who's been involved in research for a long time, it's a very big number. It almost doesn't matter how big it is. It's a very big number. People come up with different ways of doing it, as I said. And we do need to make a really big push on that. I think the problem is going back to where I started, which is around waiting lists. Waiting lists are a bit sort of problematical because everybody works flat out for years on end and things get worse. And for those people who in government who provide funding, it just seems like a bottomless pit. A senior Commonwealth public servants once said to me, it's a policy graveyard. People want to get out of that area into exciting areas like pharmaceutical benefits or something, because it's complicated. So, it's hard to flip it around in terms of achievement, with all this effort, what's been achieved. And we've heard from Amanda what can be achieved and it can be better. So I think that we're working from different angles. So my own work is more around governments and statistics and so forth. But I think the storytelling is extremely important for those who are prepared to do it. And storytelling can be incredibly powerful in making an impact on people, and they're willing to support and to actually even to understand the problem. And I'm thinking of, as an example, the late Uncle Jack Charles and the family history program that's on the SBS. And it's such he's a great storyteller. He was a great storyteller, and it made such a powerful impact on people who may only have been dimly aware of this sort of stuff. And a lot of people said, just anecdotally, it shouldn't happen. It shouldn't happen in Australia. It's not right. It's wrong. So he was able to make an enormous and very important impact, I think, on that. So I think the storytelling, as well as the broader structural stuff, is really important to get the message across.
Jenny, do you mind if I just ask Kath one quick follow-up question?
If you like.
Kath, obviously the super funds is, a huge vat of money contributed to by the Australian population, with 10% of our, wages needing to go there, compelled to go there. So it's a huge source of capital. And you did say, social housing, the endless pit of money to build. I don't know that I personally have given up on tapping that. And yes, of course, they're not going to be able to make the returns they need to fund retirement from social housing tenants. But isn't there the potential for governments to kind of top up that income so that they get a level of income on that asset, which at heart is a very long-term investment, and if they had a stable return on that, like they do invest in roads, etc., isn't there the potential, for that, without sort of giving up on it? I suppose I'm just challenging us, not to give up on that trillions of dollars of, potential in decades.
I agree. I mean, it's just, I was pointing to the circularity of it. These things come around. I don't think we should give up on anything, actually. I think that's part of it. In this sort of area, you've got to be there for the long term and keep pursuing the argument, but also looking to come at it from a different angle, where things have been pretty well rehearsed. We know what sort of arguments are going to be put forward in that round table. But actually, with ideas like that, how could it be made to work? How could you address the concerns that the pension funds have? What would be required? How much would it cost? What would it deliver? I think it needs a bit of innovation in thinking about it.
Thanks, Kath. Thanks, Vicky. Bronwyn or Amanda, did either of you want to comment?
Just that, I've got a very strong recollection 22 years ago when I was housing minister, to go to Kath's point, people sitting in my office, from the trade union movement saying, we've got all this money in the super funds, and we've got key workers who are struggling with housing affordability. Can't we kind of make this stack up? And Kath's absolutely right. Without a government subsidy, we can't get it to stack up. But Vicky, I agree. We never give up on anything. But we do have the pull of people who've invested, and often quite low earning people have invested for years and years, and the fundamental purpose of a superannuation fund is to give them the best possible returns on the money they've carefully squirreled away for their retirement. So there's not a lot of appetite for that to be diverted for another purpose, unless the government steps in, as you've said, and bridges the gap so that it is a robust investment product. And that's where the innovation. But I have to say, if it's such a fantastic idea, why hasn't anybody done it yet? I mean, I think that's the question we always have to ask ourselves. Wonderful idea. What are the barriers?
Yes, governments agreeing to bridge gaps in perpetuity is a very tall ask. Look, we do have another question here from Peter Royce, who's wondering whether any of the panelists would comment on, if I can just get my email to go our way, comment on the state condition of existing public housing assets and their management, and in turn how the current system might need to change to be able to accommodate new assets. Well, we all know the public.
I can just make one comment. I mean,
Yeah,
the challenge, of course, is that we've got a mismatch between supply and demand, and to turn the broadacre 3-bedroom housing stock into sort of medium density 1- and 2-bedroom stock is a real challenge. And then, of course, so much was invested, around 7,000 places in our high-rise towers at a point in history. So also thinking about how you best use that, whether it's through refurbishment, which has been successful, but they're very costly kind of redevelopments. So the challenge always for government is it is very, very costly to do bring stock up to standard and to repurpose it for the demand of the people who require it. And is that the best place to use money? And I do commend Homes Victoria, because the money that they have, they are trying to diversify in terms of the different models and different amounts of equity that people are bringing to the table, etc. But, if we're just relying on a public-owned, public-build model, then that's billions of dollars to meet that kind of requirement. And trying to lever other resources in the community to add to the stock numbers, I think is a no-brainer.
Yes, a lot of aged, rundown stock and not enough money coming from the Commonwealth to the states and territories to maintain it properly. And when do you say it's enough? Now, we've got a question from Adam Robinson, but going back to the superannuation institutional investor discussion of whether maybe superannuation customers could choose a percentage of their fund to be allocated to social housing investment. Any comment about that?
Look, I think that's a great idea. I think we've had super funds investing in environmental products and ethical investment products for a long time, and that's been influential, for many people as to where they put their money, myself included. Probably doesn't negate the fact that they need a return and that government needs to step in some way to make sure there's a return. But I think, we are all, as members of super funds, now actually have a really big voice. And I look at the recent example with Mike Cannon-Brookes and the super fund Hester in the decision around AGL that sought to kind of demerger their coal business and the rest of their business. And that was shareholder owners, of which Hester was a big player, that brought that to its knees. The chairman resigned, the CEO resigned, and they're back at the table now with a plan to create an accelerated environmental future as a business. So I think housing's becoming such a major issue as a community that, as a sector that's working with people right at the pointy end that are flipping into homelessness, that's great. And there is a chance for individual members and through our super funds to really, advocate for what we want to see in those products.
Any other comments?
I think it just comes down to, just Vicky, a quick comment, innovative, am I off mute? Yeah, innovative thinking. And I haven't really thought of things like that before, but that sounds like an amazing idea. And, I'm sure there are people out there working in government and, everyone combined to come up with these, not just to come up with these ideas, but to actually collaborate together and make it work. There's a lot of ideas that can be flying around, which all sound, fantastic. I know these things take a lot of time, but it would be good to be able to, have that achieved. Yeah. I'm going to lose my track of thought now, so I'll stop talking now. But great point. Definitely, let's do it. Get the brains together and do it.
Yes, and there's a bit of talk at the federal level of that happening, certainly more than there has been in the last decade. We've got Wade Roberts back observing that NRAS is set to expire soon, and some of the properties are already expiring, I understand, increasing rents by 20% in one hit and forcing many of the tenants to vacate. Would it be worth acquiring these properties to help boost social housing stock? And I understand our new federal minister is not interested in doing that or helping the states do that, but any observations?
I think at its core, it's just coming back to housing, right, and increasing the stock, and whether that's buying it off the private market, or whether that's subsidizing someone else to invest in it more. That's as valid idea as, you know, anything else. It'll remove it out of private rental, you know, markets, and possibly make private rental go up. So, you know, that the overall supply issue, the constrained supply across the community is an issue. So, you know, I think the overall allocation has to go up, but there are probably many ways that you can get to a higher social, you know, allocation faster than a full build program, but it probably will put pressure on the whole supply system.
Well, it's a whole group of people, often vulnerable, coming out of subsidised accommodation without too many options as well. Which
Yeah,
I think
that includes me.
Does that include you, Amanda?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're in an NRS property.
Yes, I am.
And what's that looking like when you're living it?
I mean, the property is amazing. It's a beautiful place. In the beginning, I was a bit unsure as to how much my property manager actually knew about the program. I think she came from the private sector, working in real estate property management, and this is her first time going into Launch Housing's real estate agent home ground. So I was concerned that she didn't know much about it, and she was kind of just, you know, not answering questions as thoroughly. But then it turned around and it's more like you can stay there for as long as you want. You know, that's all good. So I think that I just have an angel for a landlord. I think she's just incredible. As for the actual NRAS program, you know, that scares me. Just reading that fact is just scares me. So
Yeah.
it's
No, it's very disappointing. Very disappointing, and it's great you've got an angel for a landlord, but it's not a good comment on our society that you have to rely on.
No, and I'm sure that you won't hear that often.
No, not often enough. But there are some good private social landlords out there, but people are very vulnerable to
that's right.
what happens to them. Yes. Well, I think our audience is done and with their questions, and thank them very much for that. Just wondering if there are any final comment that any of our panelists would like to make. You're good. All right. Well, thanks heaps for being part of it. Thanks so much for sharing your thoughts and wisdom about what we need to see happen, what the next Victorian government needs to do to make sure that we're ending homelessness in Victoria. I would particularly like to thank Kate Colvin and Damien Patterson for their stellar work on the election platform, and I think they will have enjoyed the compliments that have been shared by panelists and others today. And I really encourage you all to think about getting out there to your local MPs, to your local candidates, and talking with them about your experience, what people experiencing homelessness are telling you, taking people with a lived experience of homelessness with you, and in your own way speaking to the data that we've made available to you in either your seat or in your region, and letting them know that this problem is not going away, it is growing, and we're not going to be able to keep hiding from it. So thanks very much, everybody, for being here today. We will give you 15 minutes back into your very busy lives. Really appreciate your support and interest. And thanks very much again, Damien, for organising it.